Welcome to another installment of Where Was God? And this one is rather strange. I wrote this one well over a year ago and just happened to get to it when the Durham report came out. It's titled Little Details Begin to Add Up, and boy, when that Durham report came out, did it show the details. Well, needless to say, it would take quite some time to write a list of the events that affected the U.S. in 2020 through 2023. And at most times it's easier to work with recent events and see how they're linked to previous events. That's like common sense. When we look at some of those events, the same key figures keep popping up on the news over and over again. Well, with the release of the Durham report, going back to the Obama administration and their involvement in the 2016 election, we need to take a fresh look at all of those people involved and make a whole new list of the questions. Number one is why people like Pelosi, Schumer, and Shifty Shift and others refuse to meet with Trump. Now, can you imagine anyone who didn't want to meet the president? Well, that includes a squad and a few choice members of people posing as Republicans. As far as they were concerned, they had nothing to discuss with President Trump. Now we see why. They were too busy making up stories about Trump. Just one thing. Remember Nixon? He resigned over a wiretap incident. Nixon confessed and resigned. We can respect that, but what about the people implicated in the Durham report? Call in the distractions and supply a list of news for the media to parrot. So those people are even more busy today than what they were before the report came out. Okay, this is a short list of what needs to be reviewed now that the Durham report came out. We obviously need to look back at some of the stuff that came out with George Floyd's death during his arrest, questions about the officers involved. And we need to take a look at the news and the social media support for the rioters during those riots in 2020. We need to take a look at the BML finances. We need to take a look at all of the 2016 and 2020 election workers. Take a look in their bank accounts. Take a look at their purchases after the elections. Take a look at their purchases before the elections. Are they living beyond their means? We need to take a fresh look at that virus. Was that virus released to distract from a fixed election, or was it released as a plan to fix an election? We need to take a look at the Chinese lab, the vaccines, the lockdowns. We need to take a look at the criminal revolving door release. All of these are linked in together. We need to take a look at the 2 Trump impeachments and all of those people involved. We need to take a look at January 6th as a whole. Was that staged? And here's one thing I just want to mention. You notice that they keep on saying that they somehow averted a radical or armed or whatever words they use takeover of the United States government. You notice how Democrats always blame someone else before they do something themselves. Are they planning on some kind of a coup if they lose the 2024 elections? We got to go back and take a closer look at the Mar-a-Lago raid. Got to take a look at all the people coming over the border. There's an endless list of those: drug dealers, prostitutes. Kids are being found working in factories that just happen to be owned by people that are members of the World Economic Forum. Well, where are those immigrants going? How come the counties are paying rents well over the market price and raising everyone's rent? You know, all these steps are being taken to add on to double-digit inflation. And inflation as a whole, we got to take a look at the people that are in the World Economic Forum, those companies, and why they all raise their prices all at the same time. All this stuff is connected. There's no reason why. Okay, one thing I just want to bring up. Remember the big news about Braggs, and he had to go through the whole process of arresting former President Trump and take him through the whole booking procedure and everything. They did that as a show. In other words, they set up a precedent. There's a whole list of people on the Durham report that, okay, we wouldn't expect them to be arrested. We would expect them to be served a subpoena, and we would expect them to attend some kind of hearings, probably by Congress or something like that, but maybe even in court. But we wouldn't expect to have their arrest televised like former President Trump's arrest was televised. Yeah, they set a precedent. Now all of a sudden, you know, a week after the Durham report was released, we're still waiting to go, how come none of those people are being arrested? Okay, question here. If the protests in 2020 were about equality and President Biden and his whole staff and everybody else supported those protests, wouldn't those laws equally apply to the president's son and all those people in the Durham report? Well, where can we start? One of the places to start is take a look at Hunter's laptop. We all knew the worst was coming when we heard about how Hunter dropped his laptop off for repairs and forgot about it. Well, a copy of that hard drive found its way to Rudy Giuliani's hands. The actual laptop was handed over to the FBI. After months, now years, there's been no word from the FBI. As a matter of fact, they came out and said it was all Russian collusion again. So Rudy started releasing some of the information. Well, what'd they do? They took his license away. Man, talk about, you know, equal treatment and equal justice for everyone. Well, that information is now about 2 years old. To add fuel to the fire, Hunter turned to social media and began posting pictures of himself with his gun, his drugs, and a number of prostitutes, some of them suspected of being underage. If nothing else, that was a cry for help. We know it when we see people start acting out like that. It's not normal. What are they doing? They're either totally insane or they're crying for help or both. Well, we could ask the question. If Hunter was under 24-hour guard by the Secret Service, did they accompany him on his drug buys and did they screen his prostitutes for him? Okay, just another fine example of equal treatment under the law. Well, the entire Hunter incident raised questions about equal treatment for everyone. Remember the riots? They burnt down cities to demand equal justice for everyone. In a republic, equal justice is not even a question. The law applies equally to everyone in a republic. The law does not see position, power, wealth, skin color, race, or sex. It took the U.S. generations to reach the equality appreciated by everyone in 2020. But since the election, we've witnessed the evolution of a specially protected class. As a matter of fact, a number of specially protected classes. People that are treated differently. Most Americans immediately recognize that separation, which was more than evident whenever election results were challenged. Remember that? Remember the names that people were called by the media and Democrats whenever they questioned the election. That separation grew over the coming weeks and months to a degree the U.S. government resembles more of a third world dictatorship than the republic we remember before 2020. We could look at the Hunter events and see how God was using Hunter to call attention to the changes and see where they are headed. Now we have a Durham report and a list of people who demanded equal justice, the right to protest, and even after a turn to looting and burning, they turned up their cries for equal justice. They claimed a call for equal justice was that important that burning down cities and shops and putting people out of business was nothing compared to the importance of equal justice. We also saw hundreds of major companies donate billions of dollars to support the riots. Now, what's the connection between those companies who did all those billions of dollars of donations and the WEF and their involvement in the election, inflation, the shortages, and the $20 trillion worth of spending bills passed in the 2 years when the Democrats were in charge? Well, there's at least two subjects God used Hunter to shed light on. Changes in the justice system we've seen over the past 2.5 years. Well, the first is the new levels of justice in the judicial system. Hunter shines a light on the way criminals are treated in the criminal system, where repeat offenders are almost always released within hours, causing an untold number of deaths and injuries. So all those people dying, the increased crime rates and everything is nothing compared to the importance of equal justice. On the other hand, political motivations are more than harsh on the opposing political party and people suspected of supporting the so-called opposition. You know, like the parents that are going to the school board and asking why there's pornography being handed to their kids. In simple terms, Hunter proves the existence of a politically controlled judicial system beyond any shadow of a doubt. Hunter is the poster child for different treatment for different people, depending upon what your political affiliation is. You only need to watch the House committee hearings on the FBI to see the two opposing views and who's on which side. First, compare the J6 committee to the FBI investigation committee. Pelosi handpicked the J6 committee. Sure, there were so-called Republicans on the committee. Those so-called Republicans were far from patriots looking for equal justice. Otherwise, they would have considered the treatment of those arrested for the January 6th event to the rioters arrested and released the same day. They would have compared the damage done on January 6th to the Capitol building to the damage done during the riots. Then considered the application of equal justice for everyone. Those so-called Republicans on the J6 committee joined in with the Democrats to defend everything those rioters did. On the FBI hearings, Democrats were allowed to appoint their own members. And they did have some rather sharp people on their side of the committee, but for the most part, the Democrats were nothing but parrots. Their main point of attack for days has been to define what a whistleblower was. That's all you hear from. They get called to testify, they have their time, and one after another Democrat wastes their time on the floor repeating the exact same words. Those people are not real whistleblowers. The head of the Democrat part of the committee claimed the FBI whistleblowers were fired from their jobs, stripped of their security clearance, and labeled as threats to the country. Forget about the timing. Forget the fact the FBI enacted revenge after they went to Congress to report what they saw happening inside the department and who the FBI was targeting and who they chose to ignore. The seed was planted for the left media to run with the report as a fact. It's all you hear on the left news, is how those so-called whistleblowers are a disgrace to their own country and fired because they weren't, even though the majority of the facts were hidden from the viewers, they know how to plant seeds, just like Satan does all the time. Okay, compare the impeachment hearings for Trump to the FBI committee hearings. Anyone remember who the whistleblowers were in Trump's impeachment hearings? Yeah, you can't remember because the Democrats made sure the identity remained secret. For the security of the nation, they said. So Democrats sit down in the FBI hearing, and the first thing they demand was the identity of the whistleblowers. Another fine example of equal treatment and justice. The other issue is the president's attention to problems the U.S. and the world are facing. Most people have little or no confidence in the president's ability to handle any problem. Look at the negotiations to avoid defaulting on the U.S. debt payments. Democrats spent $20 trillion in 2 years. Suddenly, the entire national debt was caused by the Republicans in less than 4 months. And what does Biden do? He decided to go on a worldwide tour to do what? Give money away. Now that should solve the problem. What did Trump do when he was elected? When he met with world leaders in Washington, D.C., he demanded payments dating back to World War II and had them pay their fair share to NATO and all the other organizations the U.S. has been funding for more than a generation. Trump had a way of bringing money into the U.S., not spreading it out. That's if you ever have a question of am I seeing things the way they really are, look at how they spend money. Okay, let's take a look back at Hunter. When we see Hunter's cry for help and the lack of response, we have no doubts that Joe Biden prefers to ignore problems rather than face them and try to find a solution. If a president chooses to ignore drug problems and depression his son is trying to fight, what chances does the American public have when they rely on him to tackle the serious problems the U.S. and the world is facing today? Joe is not the only person in a high position refusing to do their job and celebrating the broken judicial system. Take a look at Nancy Pelosi's husband. He was arrested for drunk driving, and of course, it was swept under the rug, at least for a time. And what happened with that one? Want to see God's hand in it? Well, Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, was involved in an incident. Well, first off, he was involved in an accident. He was found to be intoxicated and arrested. That may sound quite unusual considering the circumstances. It's not unusual for a political figure to just get away with crimes, especially drunk driving. An arrest for intoxication or drug use in California in 2022 was rare, to say the least. I mean, really rare. In most cases, law enforcement had been instructed to ignore the incident. In this case, a very high political figure was arrested for a crime that no longer existed in or around San Francisco. We should be able to see God's hand in that scene, if for nothing more than to draw attention to the fixed judicial system. But it's what followed that made all the difference. Being under the spotlight at the right moment brought hundreds of news people into Pelosi's life to see what they could find to make a name for themselves. It didn't take long before a second, more serious offense raised its ugly head. A number of reporters were able to put two and two together when they looked at a bill about to pass Congress, and Paul Pelosi just happened to invest $5 million in a computer chip company about to benefit from a bill set to pass Congress. After being involved in insider trading for years, the Pelosi's let their guard down long enough to get caught red-handed. We know God had his hand in the matter when we see the right people drawn to the right place at the right time and career criminals make that fatal error. The results of that investigation are still up in the air, but it appears nothing will ever be done. The best we can hope for is Pelosi to appoint a hand-picked committee to investigate the issue. And that's all that happened. You notice nothing ever happened with that. No, and you know, these are the people that were crying their loudest for, you know, just let the rioters burn, loot, and murder because they're calling for equal justice. Looking at that one incident with Pelosi's husband, it looks like the politics we've been used to living with for years. Same holds true with stock trading. We've grown used to seeing taxes stolen, politicians getting away with every crime in the books, and of course, using their inside information to make a fortune for themselves. After all, why would anyone spend millions or today billions of dollars to get elected if there wasn't money to be made at the end of the rainbow? And there's, speaking of a rainbow, we'll get into that in later stories. But when we combine that with the other events we've seen unfold, such as the Durham report, not to mention Paul Pelosi and his visitor that one night in San Francisco, that basically that one got swept under the rug too. We'll never hear what the full story behind that one either. The left news is trying hard to cover that one up, and right now there's too many other distractions like the Durham report to pay attention to. Now, all those people involved in the Durham report are shown to be involved in so many different ways in election fraud, using the riots, COVID, flu, and quite a few other events as distractions. Then add in collecting funds to get the rioters bailed out. We got the COVID lockdowns, and add to that the increased crime and looking the other way on bail jumpers committing more crimes and a host of other crimes we'll discuss later. Well, when we look at all these things, put them all together, they begin to add up. The little details begin to add up. What are they adding up to? Well, as a Christian, it's not our job to judge people. Well, that's true in most instances. But let's take a look at the disciple Paul, who wrote a lot about judgments and the judgment process. We basically have one word for judgment. which has a variety of meanings to fit the proper context. The Greeks had a number of different words for judgment that were just translated as judge or judgment. Most of them point to the fact judgment is in God's hands. But Paul used one specific Greek word translated as judgment that points to us and not our ability, but our duty to evaluate people's actions. People ask the question, and they're few and far between, but there's still conservative Christians that go, well, we can't judge these people, but is it in the Bible that we can judge people? Well, more and more people are trying to bring out arguments out of the Bible, but they're using the wrong Greek word. Typically, the Greek word comes to investigate and points to God's judgment. There's like 4 Greek words that point specifically to God's judgment and investigation, but there's one particular Greek word that points to our investigation of matters and our duty to investigate those matters. Okay, we find one example in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 2 through 5. Now, a person who is put in charge as a manager must be faithful. As for me, it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you or by any human authority. I don't even trust my own judgment on this point. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove I'm right. It is the Lord Himself who will examine me and decide. So don't make judgments about anyone ahead of time before the Lord returns, for He will bring our darkest secrets to light and will reveal our private motives. Then God will give to each one whatever praise is due. Now, in this particular case, the word judgment comes from the Greek word G350 and ikrino. Now, this comes from G303 and G2919, properly to scrutinize. That is, in parentheses, by implication, means to investigate, interrogate, and determine. So this particular Greek word points to how we're supposed to scrutinize, investigate, interrogate, and determine other people in matters. So is it okay for us to judge? Yes, when it is within the proper context. Okay, Paul liked to use himself as an example. As in this case, he knows he will be judged by God, although some people argue even that point, claiming those saved will not face the judgment process. Well, that's true, but remember, the judgment process follows the same basic steps as a court system here in this world. There has to be some kind of a decision made for each person. No one faces trial unless they break the law, are arrested, and charges are filed. So breaking the law is what draws attention and begins the actual judgment system or process. Paul explained this in his own terms. The problem being, we all continually sin. In a sense, we all face that judgment system partner every day of our lives. And then there's the other side of the judgment system, the process we don't want to find ourselves facing. Then we see people who we feel certain are going to face God's judgment system. And maybe that's one of the purposes Hunter is serving in our time. He has a reason to cry out for help. Maybe he found a reason to live. Maybe he wants to change his life around. Maybe Hunter found out all that money and women are not the answer. Maybe that's why he turned to drugs. If most of us had the money Hunter was paid, we'd surely be living a different life. Not the kind that Hunter chose, but most of us would not do the things Hunter did to earn that money. And maybe earn is not the right word. It appears that every step brings forth new details to examine and consider, which is the point Paul was making when he used that particular Greek word for judgment. And after Paul explained why we need to learn how to examine circumstances. Now, we don't know what's happening in Hunter's head, but, we do know that when you commit a sin, there's this guilt involved, and guilt can push people in different ways. It can either, like Nixon, he's going to stand up, admit he was wrong, and, pull up his man pants and do the right thing. Other people, like the people in the Durham report, have any of them stood up and admitted they were wrong? No. You expect any of them to? No. What do you expect them to do? They're going to run away from it. They're going to come up with every excuse in the book to justify what they did. And Hunter shows us what's happening behind the scenes with them. We know that some members of Congress have a drug problem, a drinking problem, and other problems. Look at Pelosi. Look at her husband. Come on, you saw those films. The guy was not in his right mind when, those police officers opened the door and saw him standing there in his underwear. Anyway, we just put the facts together. We don't judge people. When Paul also wrote later on in his letter, 1 Corinthians, but this one's in chapter 6, when one of you has a dispute with another believer, how dare you file a lawsuit and ask a secular court to decide the matter instead of taking it to other believers? Don't you realize that someday we believers will judge the world? And since you are going to judge the world, can't you decide even these little things among yourselves? Don't you realize that we will judge angels? So you should surely be able to resolve ordinary disputes in this life. If you have legal disputes about such matters, why go to outside judges who are not respected by the church? I am saying this to shame you. Isn't there anyone in all the church who is wise enough to decide these issues? Well, Paul brings out a couple of points. Number one, even back in his days, you couldn't trust the court system. This is nothing new. And he also pointed out we play some part in the judgment process. I'm not going to explain the entire process here. There's other books that look into God's judgment process in detail. The point here is we are supposed to be mastering the judgment process of gathering information to make a determination of sorts. We never wander into the judgment process of condemning anyone. But we do learn how to gather and examine details. Who knows? Hunter may find God and come out with the truth. Joe Biden is reaching the age where he may feel his time is drawing near and he needs to confess to the world. When we see God's hand in this, we know to expect the unexpected. God has a way of doing things where the result is nothing short of giving all the glory of God. No one in this world could have arranged all the details for the outcome we've seen so far. The more we pay attention to these events, the more we see how God is exposing details to show us how we are linked together, who's involved, and why they are linked together. Nothing is hidden from God, and if nothing else, God has been trying to make that point with those involved. You can look at it as one last call to confess. Nixon had enough guts to stand up and confess for less than 1% of what those people have done. And Nixon only tried to cheat on an election to gain an advantage. Nixon didn't steal $20 trillion. So keep paying attention. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe here. There's a lot more coming, and at this rate, none of us can imagine the next big distraction that they're going to try next. Which is only more reason to keep on praying every single day.